Fisher mountain bike. Total readiness, perfect balance, born to climb. Built to help you conquer any trail, a Fisher mountain bike eagerly awaits you. But don't make it wait too long. It was born to climb mountains, not walls. Fisher, taking mountain bikes to a new level. See your Fisher dealer.
There's a lot of good stuff.
The handle thing, and you get most of the weight on the rear wheel, and you get through that section. And with this, it was a lot more difficult. We flopped it over going uphill 3 different times during the race. You know, just like we were going too slow, we couldn't make it, couldn't maneuver, and this it was real difficult. And it had a lot of deep sand on this course. And here we are. You know, we're running about 55 pounds of pressure on these tires. So we've got a lot more pressure per square inch and digging in a bit more. There was a single track section that they threw in as the quote-unquote the great equalizer between tandems and single bikes. But we had a tactic that worked out really well. Sarah got off the back and ran ahead. She's a hell of a good trail runner. You know, I thought I'd take advantage of that. And I could maneuver this bike, and also I have my little power assist here, this like this. I'm not kidding you, this saved my fingers, because like I was, you know, just one finger, literally, with one person on here, one finger, and it was this really steep, treacherous single track with a lot of switchbacks. So this enabled me to, you know, I had just one finger in it, pretty much. It was real simple and hanging on with the rest, so my hands were rested. And then I was doing this routine where you know, we'd come up to a switchback, and I'd do the old cyclocross dismount. Just put your foot over here, put this one out here, and just keep going with it, you know, and then you can grab a bike, twist it around. So we didn't lose any time in the single track section. It was really surprising. You know, a lot of people were real surprised that we didn't have a difficult time, but we did try doing it a couple of times where she was on the back, and we'd be okay, but every time, you know, this front end would maneuver around something, the rear end would slice it in half, that maneuverability, and this would catch a rut or a rock, and with her on there and the extra weight, I'd go bouncing here or there. When I had her off the bike, well, we'd just go up and over the obstacle. It wasn't so bad. But the hard part was when she was on
Yesterday. That's it. There was always the bikes from the
that is a lot. I mean, I see it every once in a while. These two all road bikes. They're rarely see it.
Mostly it's a facility, it's a warehouse. It's a business office. There's a lot of sales. There's a lot of accounting it's a big overview. We make some frames. We made about 30 frames last year. This is all every single one of them.
Never been more excited about a bike line ever, walking away from a booth thinking I couldn't wait to get my hands on the bikes, to ride them myself, to sell them, to tell people how excited I was about the bikes. I don't think there's any other company in the industry right now that's more progressive, that really puts the effort into speccing and designing a bike for the quality of the ride, not for the quality of the sale. Meaning a company that's primarily looking at improving the ride of mountain bikes, not improving the oddness of the bike in order to make it look different. I appreciate you coming. I want to introduce Gary Fisher. He'll just speak for a few minutes, and if you have questions, go ahead and raise your hand, and feel free to ask him. Utilize him.
Thanks. I think I'd like to talk about, well, the reasons why he said he was excited this year. And quite honestly, we made more changes this year than we did in maybe the last 7 or 8 years, all those years combined. And I just want to run down really the reasons why that is, why we didn't do this stuff earlier. The bike industry, the bicycle, especially, the road bike that we're all familiar with, you ride the Tour de France on, that the professionals use over in Europe, has become an awful lot like, this is a baseball bat, this is a mitt, this is a ball. You don't fuss around with those things or else you change the game. Bicycles on the road, you have a pack of riders, you have a following entourage of automobiles with bikes on top, mechanics inside. Guy gets a flat, puts up his right hand, goes up to the side of the road, gets a wheel change, another bike. He gets one of these units, gets back into the field. And the judges, they look the other way when the guy paces back up through the cars, gets back up into the peloton. The idea there has been in international racing for some time now that they want to actuate, they want to emphasize the physical contest between the racers. They want to de-emphasize the mechanical contest between the racers. So they've always had, in criteriums, you'll have a free lap rule, where you'll be able to, you get a flat, you get a lap out, or you get a mechanical or something, you get a free lap, in order to change your wheel or change the bike, get back into the race. Well, a few years back, I think the Americans changed all this, and the way we changed it is in coming out with our international human speed championships, which was an all-out, hey, well, let's bring anything you want, and let's see how fast it is. Let's get the fastest thing going. And, back in the 30s, the international cycling body, the Union Cycliste International, had outlawed any type of aerodynamic fairing based on its own merits. And we brought that back in the equation with the human-powered speed contest, with the triathletes, and with the mountain bike, really. That we just sort of started ignoring some of those other rules. But I'll tell you, when I first started making mountain bikes started to do new frames for mountain bikes back in '79, I wanted to use many of the old dimensions and standards that had been around for a long time because it was such a new concept, such a new type of bike. I wanted it to be readily acceptable by the average bike mechanic. Therefore, I put on a standard size headset, used a Campanello dimensions, Campanello headset stack height. I used standard English threaded bottom bracket. I used standard 26/8 diameter seat posts. These things every bike shop had the headsets, the bottom brackets, the seat posts. They had the tools around. And we were a tiny, itty-bitty little segment of the market, of the whole bicycle industry, trying to gain acceptance. At that point, I felt obliged to have something that would be very easily, very readily accepted. For a long time, I recognized that fork design was rather limited by this old style dimension in here. The old dimension for the standard fork was 1-inch diameter steer column. Now, the fork blades going in there were at a minimum 1-inch diameter. And more recently, people are using 1.125 diameter, 1.25 diameter. Well, you're taking 2 of these and you plug it into one of those. And here, this is going to be a 1-inch diameter. And in order to be able to do that and have safety, we've had to make these things very, very thick, steel steer columns. Then it fans out into this nice steel stem and out to a bulge type handlebar. Well, that steering column to me always seemed to be, this is a real weak link. And you hear some people say sometimes, well, we keep our designs, we do our designs with respect for over 100 years of bicycle history. Well, this year I sort of thrashed 100 years of bicycle history. The headset diameter has been around for about 100 years. It's a real old
traditional size. And about a year and a half ago, I went to a Japanese headset maker called Tange Sakai, and they make the specialized headset. They make the Tioga headset. They've made some of the Shimano headsets. Real well-established headset maker in Japan. And I had a real unusual meeting with them. It was real unusual, and then it lasted about 20 minutes, which is very, very short for a traditional Japanese business meeting. And just asked them, hey, you guys want to make this new headset dimension? You know, it's a new size and everything. Yeah, let's do it. Boom, that was it. 10 days later, I had I had counter draftings from them, and a few weeks later, we had the first prototypes. We were already rolling on it. So what I've done for this year is I went after the bike design with really a fresh drawing board. You know, where before I was trying to make everything here fit into this little bottleneck and come out the other end and trying to achieve what I was after. This year I just really said, hey, well, if I need a new part, we'll design a new part. You know, I look at the motorcycle industry. You know, you don't go and you buy a brand new motorcycle for this year and you say, hey, well, I want to put my wheels from last year's motorcycle on this year's motorcycle, because generally it doesn't fit. It's a whole new ball game. You know, everything is designed for that bike, for the way it's going to be ridden. And we decided that we had enough clout this year to be able to do that, to be able to get away with it, to get a big enough headset manufacturers to go for it, to get the tool manufacturers to go for it, to get a few different distributors here in the States to sell the parts, so a dealer can, you know, he can phone up 1, 2, 3, 4 different people and be able to get the part. I didn't want to have it so Fisher was the only people on earth that had this part or that part, because, hey, we're closed on Saturdays, you know, and sometimes we might run out of something. People need to have better security than that, because after all, I mean, we're into high-tech, but we're into high-tech so that our customers won't be slaves to high-tech. You know, really, essentially with a bike, you make it high-tech enough, and then you don't have to tech around with it at all. You can just ride it, you know, and we have to keep reminding ourselves of that. Hey, is this thing really worth it, or is this a bunch of baloney to just make this thing look really different and make it maybe neat or something, and sell a little easier just because it's different? Well, we try to make it something that bottom line, when we ride the bike, we come back with a bigger smile. I mean, it worked better. So this year we changed our steering system. We went from 1-inch diameter to 1.25 inches on the steering column. The headset became larger itself, and it's about 33% larger in diameter itself. It uses 33% more ball bearings in it. Because the steer column doesn't flex nearly as much as the old steer column, more balls are in contact all the time, besides there being more balls to be in contact. So the headset life is a lot longer. This, however, was not our primary reason for doing this. The primary reason is that we're trying to get a lot of stiffness from the side-to-side lateral stiffness of the front end of the bike, and also the torsional stiffness, which you can check on a bike just by grabbing the front wheel between your knees and trying to twist the handlebars and seeing how much they twist. It was my feeling that, you know, especially on an off-road bike, when you're coming down any kind of steep hill, when you're trying to put on your front brake or put on your brakes, and any time that you get a lot of weight on your handlebars, which is very often in an off-road bike, you don't want to have a springing sensation between this and that little patch of rubber so much, because what happens is that your geometry, when you have so much force under it, starts changing relatively radically. It's surprising. Try next time when you're coming down a relatively steep hill and you've got a lot of braking power on the front, and you're going through ruts, and you look down at this front axle, and man, it's moving about 2 inches. And it really is. And think about how carefully, you know, someone has tried to figure out this front end geometry, and then when you have something moving around like that, well, your reaction, what actually happens is you grip the handlebars tighter. You grip the levers tighter. And this white knuckle effect is tensing up all these muscles. This creates a lot of soreness in your lower arms, your shoulders, your neck, and everything. Whereas our new system, because it's a bit stiffer, it's about twice as stiff in this small section as it was before, you can loosen up your grip considerably, and you can it goes over the rougher sections with a lot less directional input. I mean, you can go straight over stuff a lot easier, and it glides over things. And people that were having a really hard time down some really rough, rocky section were saying, "Hey, the new bike, I just ripped it. It was incredible. I felt in control." There's a big difference. You feel in control, you can relax a bit. And really, this is the first time since, the old ballooner bikes we used to ride back in the mid-'70s. They had Schwinn S2 rims, and this rim weighed 55 ounces each. We had Unicron knobby tires, and those tires were about a pound heavier each than the tires we run now. We could run those tires at about 20 pounds PSI, and you hit a big rock in a tire, you dent the rim. And you could dent the rim with such severity that the tube would be coming out, and you'd grab a rock, and you'd slam it on the rim and try and pound the rim back into shape before the tube escaped, or blew out. And those were dead tires, boy, I tell you. And it was fantastic shock absorption on the downhill. And because of the weight of the wheels, of the rims, the tires, they were incredible gyroscopes. So the style of riding was really different. You look at the photos, the old guys, in the old days, and you see big clouds of dust and whatnot a lot of the time. And that's because, one of the great ways of slowing down the bike is, get it sideways, and you could go over ruts and rocks and whatnot sideways, and the bike wouldn't bounce nearly as much as a new bike does. On the downside, those bikes weren't maneuverable. You had to kick the thing sideways to get it turned around. It was ridiculous. And big rocks, big rough things, boy, you just ride straight through it and straight over it. Incredible stability. The newer bikes, we got the alloy rims, we got the nice skin wall tires. We started going then more for maneuverability. The angles became steeper, and the bikes, the more recent bikes, man, they're quick. They climb great, they go great on single track and whatnot. When you really start moving, you really have to be an ace to be able to, because you go poing off of things and you're bouncing along. This is something that I'm trying to do to get it back in the direction of giving me some more stability. And I think I've really achieved it. I mean, everybody that's ridden this says, hey, this bike feels really stable now, and whereas, I come from a road bike background. I started road racing back in 1963 and raced for about 20 years. Rode the Tour of Nevada City up here at least 10 times, and was a road racer, criterium man. And our whole philosophy on a road bike is that the fork, the frame, everything, it needs to be, one of the reasons it needs to be lightweight is so that it will absorb shock. Early mountain bike forks, we were making them heavier and heavier in order just to get them strong enough. Then we got into prestige Unicron fork blades, and excellent material. We could make those blades lighter and lighter, and they were strong enough. But anytime, even prestige material versus prestige chromoly versus standard chromoly, same modulus of elasticity. They're just as flexible, each one. Prestige will be a lot stronger. It won't yield nearly as quickly as standard chromoly, but it'll be flexible. So we made some forks. We had some prototype forks made up that were very, very light out of prestige. They were strong, but they were very whippy. And I thought to myself, boy, this bike is just going to glide over all that rough stuff. And you know, I put it on a bike that I was already had been riding quite a bit, with a standard set of forks, and went out and rode with the same guys I go out riding with all the time, and rode down the same descents. And I found myself coming off the back all the time. And I was getting to the bottom of the hills going, oh man, that was tough. What's going on here? And what I found out, it was just such a struggle for control. I was having to struggle with my bike. You know, it was a lot of, it was moving around, you know, the whole front end. And I tried, you know, Eric Koski is very close to where I live, and tried a set of his forks. A lot better, you know, worked a lot better than the fork blade I was using. And I just wanted to take that design out to its logical conclusion, because the steer column section, you know, people think, oh gosh, you know, that's awful short, there's not a lot there. But when you think about putting these big levers on either end of it, and then putting these bearings between it here, these perfect pivot points, this thing's a perfect spring. And when you think about a set of fork blades, they generally like to go forward, they like to go back, they don't like to go side by side, so side to side so much because of the way they're oriented. However, a steer column that comes into that, it'll go any direction. It'll do a dance any particular way. So we've isolated more of the shock into the frame by putting this larger diameter here and a larger bearing surface to take all this. Another key factor is that the stem is actually, it's now 1 1/8", the stem insertion part, where before it used to be 7/8 inches. The stems, we actually made them lighter. They're 2 ounces lighter this year than they were last year in the standard size, because this small diameter, we're running a 2.2 millimeter wall thickness. The larger diameter, we're running 1.5 wall thickness. Larger diameter, it's about almost twice as stiff. It's a lighter tube overall. It was just, you know, having to go back to these old sizes, you know, having to misengineer things that was messing us up. This year's bike, we've also changed in that we went to a larger diameter top tube. We went 1 1/4 seat tube, 1 3/8 down tube. This is a set that we designed with True Temper, and it's it's a new heat-treated version for them, and it's a quad-butted tube set. Now, what I mean by quad-butted is simply that it's a 1 millimeter wall, becomes a 0.8 millimeter wall, becomes a 0.6 millimeter wall, and then back to a 0.9 millimeter wall here. That's the quad-butted tube. Top tube is actually a double-butted tube. Seat tube is a single-butted tube. That is, it's about 0.8 here and becomes 0.6 along here. This one is 0.8, becomes 0.5, 0.8. So the idea here was that the whole front, I wanted to make the bike from this portion forward real stiff, especially torsionally, laterally. From this end back, I actually went a little bit looser when I'd gone before. I'd gone back down to 19 millimeter. It used to be 22.2. And my philosophy there is more that on a mountain bike, you want a certain amount of, you don't want to have as stiff as possible on the rear end, simply because, well, this isn't a track bike. You know, it's not a velodrome that we're riding on. What we're riding on is really uneven. And you lose a lot in just the rear wheel bouncing on things, you know, and when you're trying to transmit power into the ground, when the rear wheel bounces too much, you get too much of this spin factor, and you find yourself spending more time in the air than having traction on the ground for this. So we changed the diameter of our seat posts this year. So we went to, because the length of the seat posts were getting longer and longer. This one is from Suntour, is 350 millimeters long. It's a 28.6 diameter, a bit larger. We also, on our aluminum bikes this year, we've gone to an even larger diameter, a 31.6. I get one of these alloy bikes here. And this is the 31.6 diameter. And this seat post, even though it's longer, it's 50 millimeters longer, it's the same weight as last year's seat post because it's just a thinner wall on it. The stem this year is lighter. The fork is the same weight as last year's. The headset is slightly heavier than last year's. So the whole system is a wash. It's right about the same weight as last year's system. But the stiffness and strength is considerably more. And you know, I'm just using a theory, you know, that we done with our main tube triangle a long time ago. You know, go to large diameter, thinner wall. And I just brought it out to the other parts, basically. It's pretty simple. We also, this year, we're doing a lot more investment castings. This is an investment cast plug-in piece that goes on the end of the fork blade. You see, the idea here is to bring down the larger diameter all the way to the end. Because anytime, if you taper down to a smaller diameter, you add a lot more, it becomes a lot less torsionally stiff, especially. And also, this is an investment cast stainless steel piece that sits on top of the seat tube, and it creates a really easy clamping action, and you know, real easy action up and down on the post. We also were using a wider BB spacing than before. We went from 72 millimeters out to 88. Standard traditional is 68 millimeter. And you know, with the crank arms and everything being so far out, it just didn't make sense to have the bearings so far in. It's real simple. All we did was space the bearings out further. And this way, you know, our spindle becomes about 28% stiffer, simply because we're supporting it further towards the ends than before. So we're doing this on the aluminum bikes and also on some of our steel bikes. We're using our extra wide BB spacing, like this bike over here, the Mount Tam. And also, this spacing makes it impossible for you to get the chain down between the chain ring and the bottom bracket shell. And our actually it's the exact same spindle that we used last year. It's just a little bit different spacer than what we used before. So anyway, this year has been a real exciting year for us, in that people were really enthusiastic at the shows about our bikes. Everybody that's ridden them has gone out of their minds on the thing. Been very popular. We took on a lot more orders than we did in the past. And on the other hand, it's been difficult for us to get our whole first production going. However, it's running now. We just got in, you know, the first bikes came in this last 2 weeks, and indeed there's some here in the store, and there are many, many more coming right now. You know, we've got our production lines are up, they're running right now, and it looks really good for the rest of the season. We're real pleased with that. So it's always a situation. You either get too much of what you can't sell, or you haven't got enough of what you can sell. But that's typical business. You know, this year also new for us is really getting into tandems in a bigger way, and change to, you know, using some different designs on the tandem. You know, tandems have largely been made by small specialty frame builders, and it's been real difficult for those frame builders to get the diameters of tubings that they've wanted. We have a good relationship with True Temper, and they gave us you know, the freedom. I started on a computer to design this tandem. I didn't go to a tubing book and say, oh, well, this is available and I can get that and I can get this, and if we use it here, it'll sort of work. And didn't do that at all. Went after it like just what I wanted, and could get exactly what we wanted. It's surprising. You know, some of the biggest tandem makers in the world right now are using stuff basically that's right off of the shelf. We went with much larger diameter top tube and down tube that are normal, and I didn't want to have to put in this extra tube because the mitering involved is really complex of putting in this extra third tube, and the fixturing of the bike is really complex in order that you get a bike that's straight. It's real difficult to make one of those tandem straight, and that was part of like what was extra cost of it too. I elected to use a bit larger diameter tubes, especially this seat tube. The seat tube's 1 1/4 inch, where normally you see an 1 1/8 tube on the seat tubes, and to use this different design, this up tube design. Other people like Rick Jorgensen and Ibis Cycles have used this design in the past, and it's a very logical design in it. You look at it, and it's just like a truss from a bridge. Also, what I'm trying to stiffen up here is this front BB shell, because tandem riders generally, they don't complain about stiffness in the BB shell in the rear at all. I mean, that's generally extremely stiff, and they're always complaining about the stiffness of the front end. So we sent that tube up there. Also, we designed our own BB shells and eccentrics that use this wider BB spacing that we established this year. And we also are using our larger diameter headset and steer column. Here, this fork was made in collaboration with Keith Bontrager. And it's a steel fork blade, 1 1/4 inch, steel steer column, 1 1/4 inch, and his aluminum mechanically joined fork crown. Last weekend I rode this bike with Sarah Ballantyne as my stoker in the 150-mile race from Palm Springs to Dana Point, and we placed 14th on it and finished in 10 hours and 6 minutes. Crashed on it 4 times, had a front flat. It was real exciting. We did some single track on it and figured out how to do single track on a tandem. Sarah got off the bike and ran ahead. She's a great trail runner, and it was incredible the time we made on it. I rode the tandem down behind her, and you know, you go around this real sharp stuff on the single track. Well, front end, no problem. Make it around it. Rear end wants to straighten out that line. So the rear end sort of hops over these rocks into gullies and whatnot. But right around the back, that's a big problem. Without anybody on the back, it just went bopping up and over and down and everything. I get to these hairpins, jump off the front of the bike, pick it up, put it around. She'd be running off down the trail. It worked. I couldn't believe it. You know, so the rules say we got to finish with the bike, right? On the bike, so we can. So that was interesting. Bike handled pretty darn well, though. On a lot of that was fire road with a lot of deep sand and whatnot. And sand is not the friend of a tandem. Boy, I can tell you, getting the front end loose and everything, a little difficult. But we made up a lot of time on. There were some pavement sections to it, about 55 miles of pavement, and also there was a lot of fire road section that was really fast, had tailwind, had slightly downhill, and we made up a lot of time on those sections. And Sarah, you know, she told me it was really relaxing. I mean, the rear end, it gets dampened out. Front end is still a lot of work. I was. My whole upper body was sore after that ride. You know, definitely. If you really got to stay on it for that entire distance. But anyway, at this time, I'd like to ask if there are any questions from the audience.
Do you use a larger headset on all your bikes now?
Question is, do we use a larger headset on all of our bikes? Almost all of them. Out of the 11 bikes in the line, we use them on 7 this year, and. I think, you know, in the future we might go 100% with it.
Why not all of them if you feel it's so superior?
Why not all of them this year is well, it was the cost of changing. Our lowest price bike has a standard setup, and it was also, you know, my innate fear of what a traditionalist might think. So I kept it on my Pro Caliber, which is a pure race bike. I also kept it on our hybrid bike, which is a bike that uses 700C wheels. Because we thought, you know, that would be people would like that better. We jumped into it with almost all 10 toes, not quite. Yes?
You cataloged 2 mount cams. I'm curious as to why you kept the original one.
We cataloged 2 mount tams, a classic mount tam and a new mount tam. And to be quite honest, and maybe I shouldn't even say this, is because we got a lot of the old ones. Let me put it that way.
That's called marketing.
It's called marketing, you know, put a different name on it and everything. Oh boy. No, we made a lot of those bikes. But it's surprising, they're selling really well in Japan right now. I've got a distributor in Japan that loves that bike, and they eat them up on a regular basis. This year we've got 10 overseas distributors. We really jumped up. The Japanese buy the most expensive ones too. It's really surprising. And it's surprising. We sell them bikes we sell them Japanese bikes they sold us. We send back. We get a duty drawback. We sent a whole 20-foot container of bikes over to Japan just about 3 weeks ago. So they're doing pretty well. More questions? Yes?
Where would you like to see these drivetrains go? I mean, this is talking about old technology.
The question is, where would I like to see the drivetrains go? Well, you know, the chain systems work pretty well with the derailleurs and everything, especially since, you know, Shimano's really upped the ante, and they work very, very well. However, they're a real pain. You know, it's the thing that you have to maintain the most on a mountain bike, especially when you're riding for a little bit of rain, a little bit of mud, some dust. Boy, what a mess. There's, you know, the shaft driven. Oh boy, with gear, it's real difficult to get the mechanical advantage that you do out of a chain. There have been talks of a hydraulic system. You know, you put in with the crankset, and you go back to the rear end and everything, and maybe you could have 2-wheel drive. But people haven't really pushed it that hard. It'll be interesting, you know, because Shimano is a certain size company, and they're a bit larger than Suntour. And Suntour is having a real difficult time of just trying to match what Shimano is doing. However, there's a dark horse out there, Saxire. Shimano should be down here, Saxire, up above the ceiling as far as size. Saxire is huge. The mountain bike has suddenly become popular in Europe. And if Saxire really takes it seriously, which I think they might, then watch out. They'll do something, and there'll be something new there. So that shows the most promise. Shimano, you know, people complain. They say, oh man, they make all these changes every year, you know, and everything from last year is completely outdated. Well, Shimano, they've got a lot of arrows back here in the quiver, actually, that are just sitting back there, waiting, you know, until they really have to change something or do something. They do an awful lot of research. Those guys are thinking about stuff that's 5 years, 6 years, 7 years down the road. So transmissions, you know, last year, maybe some of you saw in Mountain Bike Action, they had a photo of a front Shimano transmission with a 5-speed, you know, and that's being used on city bikes in Japan. Has been used there for a few years. Not nearly up to snuff for a mountain bike quite yet. You know, wouldn't put up with the type of abuse we put on it, and also I think they're afraid because average mechanic would say wouldn't have the tools to work on that system with. But I think, yeah, it could come because, you know, you have something like a 5-speed transmission or a multi-speed transmission, let's put it that way, and then if you had just a single chain, then you can enclose something like that. So there's some possibilities. I think, you know, sort of, you know, a standard system and then a special magical blanket. Every night you cover your bike with this blanket, and next morning you undo it and everything's perfectly clean again, you know. I think there's more to come. Any more questions? Yes?
Of all the metals that you use to build your frames with, which one do you like the best?
Question is, of all the metals I use to build frames with, which do I like the best? Well, there are different reasons for liking different materials. Titanium is an incredibly beautiful, strong material. If you have a chance, please come over and look at this particular CR7. It has a titanium handlebar, and it's a bulge handlebar, and it's 1 millimeter constant wall thickness, and there are no wrinkles where the bend is. It's a beautiful piece of material, and it's a beautiful finished piece. However, titanium is very, very difficult material to work with to make something nice. So as in regards to a beautiful material, it's the most beautiful, and you can make the lightest component out of it that'll be the strongest. Here he has one of these titanium handlebars. In regards to being able to make anything steel, oh boy, chromoly. Boy, I can cast pieces, I can have pieces drawn. You know, Tongay and their ability to draw fork blades. It's beautiful stuff. You know, they can make some incredibly beautiful pieces out of it. In regards to stiffness and exotic material like the carbon fibers, they're very, very interesting. You know, they hold some really good promise for the future. But the problems with them right now are that what do? You get this material between point A and point B. It's the world's strongest material. Now, what do you attach it to? That's the problem, is getting all these fibers and everything laminated in such a way that not one thing breaks off of it. You know, a bicycle frame is such a complex piece in regards to the stresses that go into it, and also all the little braze-on bits, the fitments on it, the bottom bracket, the headset. It's pretty difficult. We got in one of the carbon fiber handlebars, and the first thing my head of production does is he takes it over his knee and he does like this, and we hear this big crack. You know, oh no, you know, it's really scary. But I think that, you know, in the long run, when the bugs get worked out of that method, I think it will produce some incredible bikes. You know, just like the monocoque method is very interesting to make strength, but then there's an aesthetic problem with it in that a lot of those bikes, you ride it along and the things rumble. They make a lot of noise. And you're riding with this guy, and oh, where's so-and-so? I hear him. He must be coming, you know. And it's sort of, although, you know, I see problems with it, but let me tell you, I am looking at it. You know, there's a real wealth of knowledge in that field in hydroplane racing here in the States, and some of the water sports people have got that down really good, and we're trying to work with some of those people to look into things that can be made. But boy, we see this off in the distance, you know, of a few years, definitely. Because I think, you know, frames and some of the components of the bike being made with those extra fibers and whatnot could result in some astoundingly lightweight bikes, some bikes that have some fantastic shock absorption and whatnot. Yes?
I see curved blades on your mountain bike and straight on your tandem. Why that, and what's your opinion of the straight versus curved?
The question is, he sees curved blades on some of my bikes and a straight set of blades on this tandem over here. And what's the difference essentially between curved blades and straight blades? Well, one of the reasons you see the straight blade on this particular tandem is because it's an experimental tandem, and we try a lot of different things. That's not the first set of straight fork blades that we've fussed around and tried playing around with. The curved blade and the straight blade, it's a very obvious difference when you see a bike. I mean, you can see a bike from 100 yards away, and you can see it. That's the number one reason that it's become pervasive this year. But, and it's a marketing reason. However, there are some real sound reasons for doing a straight blade. And that is that it's this stiffness, it helps improve it. This straight line, when you push on the end of this handlebar, the distance from the end of the handlebar to this axle end, the movement between those 2 points is lessened slightly when you have a straight blade, in theory. In reality, though, reality has to do with, well, what you make the blade out of in the first place. If you make it a straight blade, but then you ovalize it like crazy, and you make it a small diameter at the end, that blade will not have the same characteristics. It'll be more flexible laterally, than a round blade. You could even curve this blade backwards and go forwards with a round blade if you made that blade a large enough diameter and a thick enough wall thickness. So people, unfortunately, they oversimplify it by saying, well, all straight blade forks have to be more rigid than all curved blade forks. That's not so at all. The curved blades, in general, are going to transmit more shock. If you make the blade out of the exact same material, make one straight, make one curved, the one that's straight, you'll just barely be able to discern the difference. It's not a huge difference. It's about the difference of, 5 pounds of pressure in your tire. So, there are some neat things about the straight blade. One thing is that the brake pivots become further out, and there's more distance between the front brake wire and the headset and everything. Some sort of practical reasons like that. Impractical reasons are that it puts an awful lot of stress right on just above the fork crown race here. And a lot of, especially when you're playing around with a 1-inch diameter steer column, you've got to worry about that a bit. Whereas a curved blade will radiate the stress out over more of the entire fork. But if you saw the way some of the cheaper forks are made, where they'll just shove big reinforcements inside, I mean, they're very, very heavy, but they're strong. They aren't necessarily stiff. You don't have to worry so much about this braking as you do about it bending or just wearing out headsets really quickly. They help do that also a bit. But bottom line, there's more difference in the diameters of the blades and their wall thicknesses than there are differences between curving it or not to curve it. Generally, when we curve, we try to make it a fairly large radius and not put all of the radius at the bottom. When you put all the radius at the bottom of the fork blades, they have the opportunity to move a little bit more independently. And the tire, the wheel can move back and forth in this vertical plane a little bit more than when you curve it more gently. But that's getting into some pretty esoteric parts of it, compared to just if you use a 1/10 of a millimeter heavier wall or not. Surprising. Okay, another question?
Yeah, how about cleaning your bike in the winter? You ride often. What do you recommend? As far as, do you recommend spraying the bike down and maybe the difference between chromoly and aluminum bike as far as water?
Right. Question is regarding winter maintenance of off-road bikes and the difference in longevity of chromoly versus aluminum bikes. First, about the difference in the longevity. The chromoly bikes have a big problem when you don't have drainage holes. And this is, I see people do sometimes, and I see it even recommended in magazines, is they're little holes on the insides of the stays, and on the chainstay bridge, seat stay bridge, you'll see tiny little holes drilled in your frame. Do not plug them up. They are there for a reason. Bring your bicycle inside to a warm place, and the water will evaporate out. It'll come out. It'll dry out. That's essential. You want to have, I know I've seen some custom frame builders too where they'll plug off holes inside the frame. Big mistake, because moisture gets in there. You better believe me. The problem is when it doesn't get out on a regular basis. A good frame builder, all the frames from the Orient, they'll be phosphated on the interior. They'll be, somewhat treated against interior rust. However, if you ride in the rain in the winter, if you ride on salted roads, boy, we get those frames from the Midwest, whereas the water will get thrown up into this little slot in the back and run right down the tube. And if the tube isn't, it needs a nice little hole in it, and it needs to have drainage so that the water can seep out. Otherwise, these tubes have a tendency to rust right through. And this will rust right through, and this will be, the inside of this tube will be perfectly clean. The inside of this tube will be perfectly clean. So if you're going to ride in a lot of crud, little piece of tape over the back here really helps like crazy. Making sure that there's drainage holes on your bike. Bringing your bike inside, into a warmer place, a drier place on a regular basis will really help like crazy, keep it from rusting. Aluminum frames. Frames made out of 6061. It's a good material for a bicycle because it doesn't corrode very easily. We use 7000 series material. It corrodes more than 6061. It still doesn't corrode very much. We treat ours on the inside. There's an anodizing process, and it's painted on the outside. Wax is a good friend of your frame. Keep things from rusting, to use any type of scratches in your paint or whatnot. Cleaning the bike, I recommend using, if you go to the car wash, be real careful. You can blow right past the seals and blow crud right into the bike really easily. It's better to use a big bucket of hot water, a little bit of detergent in the bucket, and some brushes. And the brushes you use are like a little floor brush, and you get a radiator brush. It looks like a big, long, heavy-duty bottle brush. And this is the way, like, after all those stage races in Europe, all the mechanics, they use the same setup. And you look at these guys' white handlebar tape, the cloth handlebar tape, and people think, oh man, they got to sit around and put that tape on every day. Boy, oh boy, what class. It's not so. It's not what they do. Take the white handlebar tape and you scrub it with the scrub brush and everything, and it'll get it really clean. And the reason they use white tape and they scrub it every day, it's a matter of cleanliness. It's like you figure these guys are riding along 5-6 hours a day. They're riding right at their limit, and their defenses are down. And you don't want this thing you're grabbing festering, right? You want it clean, day after day. So that's why they use white tape and they'll scrub it every day. Anyway, the brushes make a nice vehicle for the water, because you can get in there and you can clean what's dirty, yet it doesn't use a bunch of pressure that blows past a lot of seals. On the greasy stuff, I like to use stuff called gunk. That's the brand name. It's available. It's made for cleaning engine blocks. The reason I like it is because it is viscous. It is thick. It does, when you put it on a chain, you dress it on a chain, and you put it on a crank set, it doesn't run into the bottom bracket and attack the grease in the bottom bracket. Then you don't have to repack the bottom bracket. It does not run all the way deep into the chain. It runs sort of semi-deep into the chain. It takes out the stuff that's in there pretty much, but doesn't like if you use kerosene or something like that, you stand a chance that it takes out every bit of lubricant in the chain. Then you have to lubricate the chain very thoroughly. What I like to do is keep the bike intact. Now, that is not remove the rear chain, remove the chain. This has become even more of a problem with the new Shimano Hyperglide chains, because the pins are difficult to remove and reinstall without messing it up so that they pop apart on their own. Great news, huh? Anyway, if you learn how to clean a chain while it's on the bike, you're more likely to clean the chain more often. If you learn to clean the chain in a real simple manner, you're more likely to clean it more often. So what I like to do, I take out both wheels, take a big long screwdriver, stick it through these holes. That holds the chain. Clean the freewheel. Put a little, or have a separate brush for the gunk. A little tiny container of gunk. You dab the gunk in there and all the greasy spots. Then you hit it with the water. The water turns the gunk white. The gunk and the grease fall right off. And you hit it with the scrub brush. You do the freewheel. You take a long bottle brush and you do the inside of the hub, the spokes. You do the wheels, the tires, the rims with the regular scrub brush. These are while the wheels are off and separate. Then you come back to the frame. You do you put the chain in the big chain ring, and it's on the screwdriver here. And you run the chain along. You gunk it, and then you go in then you hit it with the hot water and the scrub brush and everything. And I usually keep a scrub brush that's separate for the chain, a funky one, and another one that's cleaner, that you can use on the rest of the frame, because the scrub brush will pick up enough grease that when you go with the rest of the frame, it'll get the frame greasy. Anyway, this has taken me almost as long to tell you about it as it is to do it, because the essence of doing this is that it's really quick, an easy way. So you go over the frame with the hot soapy water and everything, and you just dribble a little water over it, and then go back over with your rags, and you can clean the bike relatively quickly. You let it dry out, you re-lube. We like to use our boat trailer grease that we buy from Stay Lube, and it's a blue color grease, and you get it on your Levi's. You got to wash your Levi's about 2, 3, 4 times until it comes out. It's real tenacious stuff. It's not the kind of stuff you use in a time trial bike, but it will withstand riding back and forth underwater for a longer period of time than any other grease we know of. The grease guard system from WTB is a good system, but you have to use it, and you got to remember to use it, because people, they buy that system, sometimes they figure, well, gosh, I forgot, and stuff wears out a bit quicker, because that grease is thinner. It goes out a bit faster than does our blue grease. One of the things that mountain bike riders love to do that just wash out bearings like nothing else is they discover, hey, I can not only ride across this stream, I can ride through it, I can ride up, I can ride down, and riding up here to my knees, it's a lot of fun. Well, what happens is when you're bouncing along on the bike, your axles on a bicycle, they all flex a bit. And as they flex, these seals, remember, seal is a relative term. Sealed is a relative term. And the seals open and close, especially when you're riding it along. If you took the bike like it is, threw it in a pool, it wouldn't be as bad as actually sitting on it and pedaling the thing along. Because you're opening and closing up those seals, you're mixing around the bearings with the water and everything. It's wonderful. It's like a blessing to bike mechanics everywhere, because any more questions? Yes?
You had Sun Tour on your bike last year, on the CR7.
Yes.
Why Shimano again?
This is something that we should be asking the consumer more than, because it's the popularity, of Shimano. Shimano is so entrenched. What can I say? They do a better marketing job, maybe?
You like the Shimano better, as a rider? What do you think?
Some things on the Shimano are better. Some things on the Sun Tour are better, actually. You'll notice this bike has Sun Tour shifters mounted underneath the handlebars, Sun Tour derailleurs, Shimano chain, Shimano freewheel. Works pretty well, that bike. Shimano is a bit bigger company than Sun Tour, and they've just been pushing things harder. They've been pushing the whole marketing of it harder. Sun Tour, its weakest part is, quite honestly, I think their chains right now. You take a Sun Tour system and you put a Shimano chain on it, it generally works better. Or you put a Cedar Sport chain on it or something like that. It's really, I don't know. It's hard to say if Sun Tour is going to come back in regards to total popularity. Sun Tour has it has an underdog reputation now amongst the industry, and the magazine editors, they're all really, they like Sun Tour. They'd like to see Sun Tour do better. However, we go to our distributors, our dealers, they're all telling us, hey, we got to have the Shimano stuff on it. As far as actually working, I mean, Shimano is great, I think it's good stuff. Sun Tour, their new stuff, their new 6,000, 9,000 rear brake, this rear brake with the SE, I am totally sold on it. I think it's a wonderful brake, the best rim brake I've ever used, and round chain rings, I like those, better than the BioPace. The BioPace is going to disappear next year, believe it or not. That's an incredible example of the power of marketing, the entire BioPace fad. Sure, BioPace works, they did their homework, they did a good job, but it doesn't work all that much, and they They forced everybody to use it for a long time. For a couple of years ago, or last year, our Pro Caliber bicycle, Shimano equipped, came with round chain rings. I had to pay more for the round chain rings than I did for BioPace. They put a penalty on it, you know. So they're some marketing firm, let me tell you.
Curious, given the competitiveness of your industry, do you think you're going to see less sponsorship of professional riders?
Well, yeah. The question here is, considering the competitiveness of the mountain bike industry, will we see more or less sponsored professional racers? And I think that's largely dependent on where the sport goes in regards to the amount of publicity it receives. This year, I am sending my top paid professional, Sarah Ballantyne, to Europe for most of the year, because in Europe, she's gaining more recognition than she is here from the general press. It's incredible. You know, I mean, from the regular, everyday press, she went over there last year, rode 2 races, and got an incredible amount of publicity. Here in the States, the publicity that she receives is all it's in the mountain bike magazines, it's in the bike magazines, but very little outside of that. And it's all to be seen at what happens in our race scene here. Now, I'll tell you, a couple of weeks ago, both the organizer of the Coors Classic, which we're now calling the Classic, Mike Eisner, he called me up, and another guy is doing the Tour of the Californias, came by and visited me, and these are both, you know, premier road races, and they told me that their new sponsors, their sponsors to be, showed a big interest in doing some sort of off-road racing. And these are really big sponsors that make Coors look like a medium-sized sponsor. And so I think that, you know, there's a real good possibility that there'll be some awfully big mountain bike events coming up in the next couple of years. And if that happens, then and they start getting the kind of you know, mainstream publicity that I think it can, because quite honestly, you know, road racing, it's a lot more difficult for the average person to understand than off-road racing, and that's a big problem here in the United States in regards to bike racing making it big, you know, especially road racing. It's just like, you know, we're working with Vittoria Tire right now, the Italians, and he put it, you know, one of the main guys from Vittoria, an Italian, was over here, and he's talking about going to a baseball game and saying, yeah, man, I mean, I go to a ball game, you know, guy hits the ball, guys running around the base, I don't know what's going on, this is bizarre, you know, I don't understand it, how can people watch this all day, you know, and it's the same way that people, you know, a lot of Americans feel about road racing on TV, you know, they don't understand what's going on, they don't understand the drama and the tension that's building and all that. There is going to be a learning curve for people, and I think a lot of the bigger sponsors are realizing that mountain biking is maybe an interim answer for them, and that they want to get more involved. And this is a part of the whole process of introducing Americans to the complex sport of bike racing is first get them into mountain biking. The thing that's ironic, though, is that mountain biking, as compared with regular road racing, when you really start getting into it, is just as complex, every bit as complex. But it's a lot easier to understand. It's a lot visually. It's I think more entertaining, mile per mile. Thank you. Yes.
I had a question on mounting the shifters on the underbelly.
Yes.
Is that going to be a thing coming up?
As a matter of fact, yeah, it is. This is. You should, if you have time, try this setup. Try riding it around, because it's very interesting. It's in a very logical spot. You don't have to move your thumb up, unwrap your hand at all. Also, you know, you can push forward with your thumb, and you can pull back with your fingers underneath. You'll notice, though, on this set that I carved these away, and that was so that I could get my thumb wrapped around underneath and not have it confined in here. But Next year, both Suntour and Shimano have got a system for underneath, and they've got a pretty radical new type of shifting idea there. But yeah, we'll see. It's heavier though. That's the problem. It's not as light. So it gets more.
Is that the traditional shifters that go on top?
You can, however.
It doesn't work very well.
Yeah, well, what you can do is your rear shifter is crossed over, is over here, and your front shifter is over here, and your brake wires have to cross over and to be able to do that. You also notice on this one, though, I mounted the brake levers far inboard, and the shifters are outboard of the brake levers, so it's a little different. Yeah, you had a question back here?
Yeah, I'm curious about what the tuning system
It's a dog. I mean, God, you know. But I mean, you know, the stuff is beautifully finished. You know, the crankset is incredible. The chain rings are hard and beautiful. You know, Campanile visited me about a week and a half ago. Showed me a new set, much nicer. So they made about, I'd say, their last group. What's that? About 4 or 5 years behind. So they've made up at least 3 years in this last 4 months. It's amazing. So their crankset is more beautiful than ever. They have little shorty brake levers that are lightweight now. They've got the crankset is absolutely delicious. I mean, incredible, beautiful, a new one. And they have a normal type seat post. It looks a lot nicer, you know, and it's lightweight. And let's see, they have 3 different length derailleurs, different length arms, and they're beautiful. You know, they have a better a standard type shifter on the top. So there they are. They're off the back. Everybody's going to the bottom shifter next year, and they'll be on the top. Oh boy! And they have you know, they have their standard hub set on there. Standard. They have cantilevers, and their cantilevers are the most beautiful cantilevers I have ever seen. They look similar to a Shimano set, but everything on them is like they really belong in this tandem. Oh, they really belong in it. They're much beefier and stronger and really neat looking. The cantilevers are going to be one of those pieces that you'll have that anybody who's really serious about cantilevers will somehow find that cantilever set on their bike. It's a nice set. Yes?
I noticed you got the brakes on the top of the basket.
Yeah, the question is why are the brakes gone up to the top? Before we were down on the bottom, and what's our preference?
Well, the Japanese last year.
Well, everybody and their brother wants the brakes up on top, and a lot of that was generated by one guy named Zap down at Mountain Bike Action. He just those guys hammered on Chainstay mounted brakes for every reason they possibly could. Shimano came out with the solution that really works pretty darn well, and that's that U2 brake brace piece, because it makes the brake work much nicer than it did before. But damage was already done, you know, and people wanted to go back to the cantilever. Cantilever works very well on a larger frame. The problem gets to be on smaller frames. When you have people that the stays get so low that you start hitting your ankles on them, and when you lower your saddle and hang yourself over the rear, you hit your calves will touch the brake sometimes. As far as braking power goes, it has more to do with how you set up the brake, what kind of brake cables you use. Use these Diacompi hardliner brake cables. Really great. Really make a big difference on any brake. It's a wire that's been drawn a second time, and it's extremely smooth. The more pressure you put on this brake, I mean, that last bit of pressure, it gets transmitted back to that brake instead of getting all absorbed by friction. Another thing is the better brake pads. But when you use the better brake pads on a cantilever brake, especially the lighter weight cantilever brakes like the Shimano one or Modolo is very lightweight, they tend to resonate. They tend to squeal, especially if you use it on a bike with light seat stays, like some 0.8 millimeter wall seat stays, some real light on one of our old comp bikes or something. They tend to squeal a lot. So it depends. You know, if somebody is going to race a lot and they just want performance and they're out there on the race course, they don't care if their brake squeals. They can scare people, you know, a mile away. They don't care. But most people on a mountain bike ride, that's part of what it ruins, the aesthetics of the ride when you've got this bike that's making all this noise, and people can hear you half a mile away. The new Suntour brake, this 6,000 and 9,000 version, it has the SE braking set up in there, and I like that brake. That's my favorite rim brake right now. The SE, the original SE, to me is a very innovative brake, but very scary. It's very difficult to set up. The hardware self-destructs on it, but what scares me the most is there's no modulation of braking power. It is very similar to taking a stick and sticking it into the spokes. It'll lock up the brakes when you don't want them to be locked up. And to use it on the front is, everybody they tell you, oh man, I love these brakes. They're great. After I fell off about 3 times, I got used to them and to the sensitive touch, and I go, hey, wait a minute, you fell off 3 times? Sense of fear of God me. However, the Suntour brakes, I am really, really pleased with. They have the SE feature on the rear only. It is not so progressive that you do not have modulation. The way it comes out, the rear brake is a bit more powerful than the front, and they're very simple to set up. They just plug right in there. Their parts are not so exposed so that you can go through a lot of mud and crud and everything, and they don't get you don't have to re-lubricate them. Also, they present a very low profile, and you can use it on a smaller frame. A smaller person can use it and not have problems touching it with their calves or their heels or anything. So if you've got cantilevers and you want to have a retrofit a brake, I really recommend these. They're really, really nice, these Suntour brakes. The original idea of putting it under the chainstay was that we freed up this area. We didn't have any of these cables on the top tube. We didn't, so it helped the look of the bike. We thought, oh man, the bike looks clean, it looks neat. The cable that we used was actually a little bit shorter that went down there. So theoretically, there was less flex in the cable. Certainly you didn't have this back piece of housing to act as a little bit of extra mush. The theory was that the chainstay, being a larger diameter than the seat stay, would flex less and therefore give you a more powerful braking. The reality, however, though, is that because the brake was mounted on the underside of the chainstay, when the brake goes on, it tended to rotate, and the way the wheel was rotating, it tended to want to rotate the brake away from the wheel, whereas a standard cantilever brake, because it goes on this side of it, the wheel's rotating this way, it has its own sort of self-energizing effect. So when you took a U-brake and you mounted it up here, or you took a roller cam and you mounted it on the seat stays, it actually had more of a soft touch than it did mounted on the chain stays. So, but it's back to the old thing too of you can skin a cat a dozen ways, and make it work each way. Another problem with mounting brakes on the chainstays, especially the U-brake, became that everybody was going to shorter and shorter and shorter chainstays, and then there was no room for the mechanism of the brake yoke and the bottom bracket. The bottom bracket got so close to that brake yoke, everything got so short that there wasn't enough room for that mechanism to really work properly. So it became real difficult to quick release the mechanism down there. But mostly, fashion. Number one. People wanted to go with top-mounted more. But I still, I'm not real happy with it. I don't think that this is, I think in the future though we'll see more, I want to see disc brakes, something like that, something that's mounted on the hub, and get away from all this, because people tell you, oh well, this brake gathers a lot less mud. Not so at all, because what happens is you ride a bike with a cantilever through a lot of mud, and you'll gather mud on the top and on the bottom down here in the chainstay area where where the chain rings are and everything. When you ride a bike that has simply a U-brake down there, you gain a lot of mud down there, but you won't gain any here. You see, try and pick up rice with a single chopstick. You don't get very far. Put two of them out there, you get plenty. And it's the same with mud. You have a single stay going down there, and the mud has nothing really to stick to. The minute you put another member on here, a brake, arm, something, cables in there, it starts gathering up the mud. The mud starts gathering like crazy on it. So the eventual solution, as I see it, is going back down to the hub and putting your braking mechanism in there. Then you'd be able to make rims even lighter weight than what we're doing and more aerodynamic shape, so it would slough off the mud better and easier, you know. And then you don't have to worry so much about your dimensions. For instance, this fork of ours has an incredible amount of width in the front end of it, and we do that by making a very tight radius bend on this tube, and because the tubes join an 1.25 inch section, not a 1 inch, so the curve starts further out. The downside of this is that we had to make our own investment cast brake mounting brackets, because otherwise the brake pivots would be wider than stock, and it's real difficult to mount. The brake wouldn't set up stock on it. So it's always, you try to do one thing away from the industry standard, and you have to compensate in certain places, or maybe redesign what was for everybody else a stock piece at one time. But we get what we want, which is more mud clearance out of it. Yes?
We think of the like a new wave of frame designs, the elevated stay and shock absorbers and things. Is that a possibility for the future?
Well, we got two different questions here. One is, what do I think of the elevated chainstay bike? And the second one is shock absorbers. Take on the shock absorber one first. You've seen advertised the rock shocks. Well, there are actually about 4 of those in actual existence. And I rode one the other day, and they're great. I'd carry around that extra 18 ounces to all kinds of places. It's great. On a tandem, it would be so neat to have one of those. Now, you could go into stuff that was really crazy and off camber, and the front wheel had more traction. It just dead out you felt a lot more confident on the front wheel. And you go into, just riding into a curb and things like that, you could just take it dead on, boom, right into it. And nothing, it would just right over it. Great item, I think when it really gets going but they haven't, it's not reality quite yet. It's 18 ounces extra too. I saw one though that was different, completely different guy. That's only going to add 6 ounces. I think that's really going to be the ticket. We've seen, rear shock absorbers. Like they had a bike called the Descender a few years ago, and I rode this Descender. I had it for a week, and that was a strange bike because it was interesting. Well, both this rock shock and that Descender, you'd ride it on the flats, you get out of the saddle and hammer on it, and you couldn't make it depress. It was rigid. It felt very good that way. However, in the Descender, the rear end had absorption. The front end did not. So you'd come down a hill at any kind of speed, and you go over any type of bumps or anything, and depending on if you hit it in the front, it would be like boom, you'd hit things really hard, but you hit it in the rear, it'd be great. So it was totally unpredictable what you were going to hit, the front or the rear. That bike didn't work. It didn't work for descending. It worked really well in one situation. It worked really well when you get out of the saddle and you're going up a short, steep hill. God, you got gobs of traction. It was great, and you just go ripping up this hill that normally on a stiff end, you go boingity boing and boing here and there and just not get a lot of traction, and therefore not a lot of power into it. So I think, the shock absorption into things, that's another big area where we're going to see some big improvements in the future. The elevated chainstay design, I think promise for that too. I don't think the way it's been done right now is really the right way. I'm working on my own design on the thing. I got a key thing. You'll see it later on. There's a key difference in mine than all the other ones, but difficult. The elevated chainstay bike, like the Alien, is a very difficult right now because the chainstay comes up, attaches here to the seat tube, and then goes forward and attaches to the down tube.
And making the, and then you've got to work on it. You got to get it perfectly straight before you put the rear triangle on it. And you got to tack portions of the rear triangle on, then straighten it, and then tack portions of the rest of it on. Because of the, you're not just making these simple triangles, but you're making, you know, more box sections. So it's a difficult frame to make right now. As far as its weight, it's heavier, you know, for the same given amount of stiffness. And its feature is that it has more mud clearance, you know, really. And the problem, though, and then they talk about, well, there's no chainstay, so you don't get chain suck. You got this other problem, though. It's really funny because the chainstays aren't the reason that the chain gets stuck to the chain ring. The chain, when you shift the chain from the big chain ring down to the small ring, and it comes across these different teeth, and it gets wedged between the teeth. It comes up around underneath, you know, underneath here, and with a chainstay, it gets stuck on the chainstay. It stops. When you have an elevated chainstay, it keeps wrapping until the rear derailleur breaks off. So you don't, with an Alien, you don't have chain suck, you have derailleur snap. So, at any rate, both Shimano and Suntour developed features in their chain rings. Next year are anti-chain suck features.
Yeah. So there's no free lunch sometimes, you know. It's frustrating sometimes, you know. Sometimes you think you got this problem licked, and well, that wasn't the problem. It was this other thing was the problem, you know. All right. Any other questions? Well, I've obviously used you all up. We'll go out and ride the bikes a little bit later. I think we're going to go ride the bikes pretty soon. Or? Good.
What the plan is now is we changed the location of where we're going to do it. So we've got a better hill for climbing at the segment. That's part of where the bikes
excel so much. Around 1 o'clock. I'll be at Latrobe Road at the Latrobe School, and we've got maps back there for anybody who wants to come and check it out. If you don't have a helmet with you, we'll have some there. You can come and take the various rides. We'll be using some of theirs. We'll take some of ours out of stock, and you can take them for down the road a ways. It's just a pretty wide dirt road, but it's pretty steep in the beginning, and it has a good climb coming back up, and it's got some. It's not a real smooth road, so you'll be able to get a real good handle on how the bike feels. And that'll be about 1 o'clock. We'll be at the school. So if you want to take a break for lunch, there's several places down here. You can get a good sandwich and pizza, burger, type of thing. Okay?